For more than 2,000 years, the galaxy operated under the belief that the Sith had been completely eradicated. The Jedi Order celebrated their victory at the Battle of Ruusan, convinced that the dark side had been defeated forever. What they didn't know was that a single survivor had witnessed the destruction of his own order and had drawn a terrible conclusion from the carnage. The old ways had failed because they encouraged weakness through numbers, because they allowed petty rivalries to fester into civil war, because they spread power so thinly across thousands of ambitious lords that none could truly master the dark side. The solution came to this survivor not through gradual realization, but through a moment of brutal clarity as he watched the thought bomb consume the souls of Jedi and Sith alike. The Brotherhood of Darkness had believed that equality among Sith would prevent the infighting that had destroyed every previous empire. They were tragically wrong. The survivor emerged from the forest of Ruusan with a new purpose burning in his heart. He had witnessed the death of his entire order and had felt nothing but contempt for their foolishness. The Jedi believed they had won a great victory, but they had only eliminated the weak and the complacent. The strong remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. This survivor had been a miner named Dessel before the dark side claimed him, but that identity was now as dead as the thousands of Sith who had fallen to the thought bomb. He would rebuild the Sith from the ashes of their greatest defeat, but he would do so according to a radical new philosophy that defied everything the dark side had taught for millennia. The old Sith had believed that power came from numbers, from armies of dark side users who could overwhelm their enemies through sheer force. This survivor had seen the flaw in that thinking with his own eyes. 20,000 Sith Lords had been reduced to 100 and then to nothing because they had failed to understand the fundamental nature of the dark side. The answer came to him on the planet Lahan, where he discovered an ancient holocron created by Darth Revan 3,000 years earlier. The ghostly image within that crystalline artifact revealed a truth that would reshape galactic history. The dark side thrived on ambition and conflict, which were not flaws in the Sith philosophy, but its very foundation. Every Sith empire had collapsed from within, not through Jedi victory. The pattern repeated endlessly. Powerful masters would be overwhelmed by coalitions of weaker apprentices. Multiple Dark Lords would betray one another, and each betrayal weakened the Sith Order instead of strengthening it. The Brotherhood of Darkness had tried to solve this problem by making all Sith equal, but equality was antithetical to everything the dark side represented. It removed the drive for individual power that made the Sith strong, spreading power across thousands of average followers who could never achieve true mastery. The survivor realized that the path to victory lay not in amassing followers, but in concentrating power into the hands of those strong enough to wield it. The philosophy he developed from Raven's teachings was elegant in its brutality. Only two Sith could exist at any time, a master who held absolute power and an apprentice who desperately wanted to take it. The system was simple yet ruthless. A master would train a single apprentice over many years, sharing knowledge and techniques while always maintaining superiority. The apprentice would serve, learn, and grow stronger, knowing that their ultimate purpose was to challenge their master and prove themselves worthy of the title. Eventually, the apprentice would kill the master and assume their place, becoming the new master and beginning the cycle again with their own apprentice. This created three advantages that the old Sith empires had never enjoyed. First, all the dark side's strength would flow through only two individuals instead of being spread across thousands. Second, each generation would necessarily surpass the previous one, as the apprentice could only become master by demonstrating greater strength and cunning. Third, the Jedi would believe the Sith were extinct, allowing them to operate in complete secrecy while their enemies grew complacent and blind. The theory required testing, which meant the survivor needed an apprentice who could embody the principles of this new order. He found what he was looking for on the forest floor of Ruusan, among the corpses of Jedi and Sith who had fallen to the thought bomb. A 10-year-old girl knelt crying over her dead pet, her grief so pure and powerful that it had manifested as raw force energy. Nearby lay the bodies of two Jedi Knights, their necks broken. The scene told the survivor everything he needed to know about the girl before him. The Jedi had killed her companion, and she had lashed out with nothing but grief and rage, with no training and no technique, and both Jedi were dead. This was exactly the raw material he needed: untamed power, natural talent, and the instinct to kill without hesitation. He questioned her, testing her spirit, and found no fear in her responses. She admitted to being a killer and accepted his offer of training without hesitation. In that moment, the girl became Zannah, the first apprentice under the new order the survivor would establish. The survivor claimed another prize on that battlefield. According to ancient Sith tradition, he proclaimed himself Darth Bane, reclaiming a title that carried centuries of authority. The name represented complete transformation, the death of who he had been, and the birth of something new. From that moment forward, every Sith Lord would bear the title of Darth, a constant reminder that they were part of a lineage stretching back to the earliest dark side users. The training of his young apprentice would establish the foundation for Sith teachings for the next millennium. Their first lessons began as they crossed the battlefield, and Bane moved quickly while Zannah's short legs struggled to keep pace. She complained about the pace, but he refused to slow down. She needed to find a way to keep up on her own, and her protests that this was physically impossible met with immediate correction. She was strong in the Force, just as she had been when she killed those Jedi, and now she needed to learn to control that power intentionally, rather than letting it erupt in moments of desperation. The lesson was simple but profound. Zannah admitted she didn't understand how she had killed the Jedi, that it just happened. Bane explained that nothing simply happens, that she had channeled the Force through anger and hatred, emotions that fueled the dark side, and she needed to access them by choice rather than accident. He continued walking and warned that if she fell behind, he would leave her on Ruusan. The girl tried to trip him with the Force, but Bane anticipated the attack and redirected the energy, knocking her to the ground. He was careful not to hurt her because he wanted her respect rather than her fear. Once she stood, he explained the real lesson. A Sith must know when to unleash the dark side's fury and when to hold back. Patience could be as powerful a weapon as rage, but only if anger remained under control. The child gathered the Force again, this time using it to refresh her exhausted body rather than lashing out, and she started running almost effortlessly as she channeled the Force to boost her speed and stamina.
After gathering supplies, the Dark Lord brought Zannah to his ship and told her she wasn't coming with him. The apprentice was shocked, but Bane explained that this was part of her training. To understand the dark side, she had to experience hardship and struggle, because the strength of the dark side came from within, and she needed to draw on it without him always being there. Zannah challenged him, asking why he was abandoning her when there were always supposed to be two Sith. The Sith Master nodded, but then asked why she had followed him in the first place. After careful thought, she answered that she wanted to unleash her full potential and learn the ways of the dark side. The Sith Master nodded, then asked what would happen if he had nothing left to teach her, and she had no answer. This was when he revealed the ultimate truth of the Rule of Two. There would come a day when she learned everything he could teach her, and on that day she would challenge him for the title of Master, and only one would survive. When her powers surpassed his, he would become expendable. This wasn't betrayal, but the basic rule of the Sith.
His instructions were simple. Reach the planet Anderon in 10 standard days. If she couldn't find a way on her own, she wasn't worthy of being his apprentice, and he would find someone else. Bane climbed into his ship and left, leaving Zannah alone on Ruusan's surface. As he flew away, he sensed her anger building like a fire, and that brought a smile to his face. Remarkably, Zannah survived, finding a transport shuttle and killing everyone on board when the crew tried to take her to the Jedi fleet instead of Anderon. 10 days later, she arrived, and her master was waiting. Over the next decade, Bane taught his apprentice far more than combat. The training that followed tested Zannah in ways she never expected, because her master believed the dark side revealed itself through suffering, and he made sure she suffered often. One early lesson took place on Ambria, near the shores of Lake Nath, where Bane told her to bring him a Neek, alive and free to move, coming of its own free will. These small reptilian plant-eaters were native to the planet, but the task proved far harder than she imagined. The nervous creatures would run at her approach, disappearing into cracks in the rocks. She couldn't trap one because Bane's orders required it to come willingly. She tried drawing them out with food, but the weary creatures refused her offerings. She attempted to control one's mind, as she'd seen Bane do with other beasts, but the Neeks had been changed by Lake Nath's dark side energies, making them immune to mental manipulation. Eventually, she realized she would have to tame one through pure patience. Each morning, she sat cross-legged at the cave entrance, practicing meditation for hours. For 3 days, she was completely alone. And then, on the 4th day, the Neeks began showing themselves, darting past well beyond reach. By the 2nd week, they would sit and stare from a few meters away, and by the 3rd week, one curious young Neek came close enough to touch. She began bringing food, letting bits sit in her open palm, and the same bold creature would approach with fear, slowly gathering courage to snatch the food before running away. Over time, she positioned herself farther from the cave each day, and the Neek would search for her, moving beyond its home territory. Bit by bit, she drew it closer until one day it followed her all the way back to camp. The journey took 4 hours, and when she arrived at nightfall, Bane was waiting by the cooking fire. The moment the Neek chirped up at her, Bane reached out with the force and snapped its neck. He told her she had done well, then ordered her to toss it in the stew. She had learned 2 lessons that day. Patience was a weapon of the Sith, and emotional ties were deadly weaknesses.
While the Jedi celebrated their victory and disbanded their military forces, Bane spent years building a network of spies and informants across hundreds of worlds. He used his wealth to bribe officials and hire agents, none of whom knew that they worked for a Sith Lord. His political manipulation was simple yet effective. He would find radical separatist groups opposing the Republic and encourage them to strike before they were ready. These groups would fail, but their actions forced the Jedi to waste time putting down rebellions, keeping them constantly distracted from the real threat. Zannah learned to play her part perfectly, infiltrating organizations, gaining trust, and manipulating from within. On one mission to Sereno, she spent months developing a relationship with a revolutionary leader, feeding him ideas he believed were his own, and convincing him to kidnap a former chancellor. She knew the mission would fail, which was the point. The kidnapping failed, the revolutionary was killed by the Jedi, and Sereno's noble houses cracked down hard on all separatist movements. The Jedi believed they had stopped a dangerous threat, never realizing they were manipulated into destroying a movement that might have succeeded if given more time to grow. This was the real power of the Rule of Two, not just physical strength or force abilities, but patience, planning, and the ability to make enemies serve your purposes without them knowing they were being used. 10 years after Ruusan, Bane's body was covered with creatures called orbalisks. These armored parasites had latched onto his skin during a mission, and once attached, they couldn't be removed without killing the host. The parasites fed on dark side energy flowing through his body, and in return they provided incredible benefits: rapid healing, enhanced strength, and living armor that could withstand direct lightsaber strikes. The cost was steep, causing constant pain and making him more aggressive while dulling his strategic thinking. Then came a crisis that would test both master and apprentice. A team of 5 Jedi tracked them to Tython in the deep core, and the battle was brutal. The Orbalisk armor protected Bane from dozens of fatal lightsaber strikes, but when he tried to kill an alien healer named Waro with Force Lightning, the Jedi created a defensive shield. The lightning became trapped inside, bouncing off energy walls and striking him repeatedly. The electrical energy coursed through his body and the orbalisks, and the parasites absorbed too much energy, swelling and then bursting. When the orbalisks died, they released toxic chemicals that began dissolving his body at the cellular level. He survived, but barely, his apprentice killing 3 Jedi, while the remaining 2 died when Waro's shield failed. Bane collapsed, his body ravaged by electrical burns and deadly toxins that were slowly killing him. Zannah faced an impossible choice. According to the Rule of Two, she could let her master die and claim his title, but she wasn't ready. He still had vast knowledge she hadn't learned, and if he died now, all that knowledge would die with him, and the Sith Order might not survive.
She made her choice by bringing the dying Bane to Ambria, to the camp of a Force healer named Caleb. This man had healed her master once before, but when she arrived, he refused because he knew what Bane was. Her cousin Dervit complicated the situation because he believed she could be redeemed and came up with a plan. Convince Caleb to heal Bane, but only if she sent a message to the Jedi revealing their location. He believed the Jedi would arrest the weakened Sith Lord, and his cousin would turn from the dark side. She agreed to send the message, and an anonymous communication went to Coruscant, stating that a Sith Lord was on Ambria, badly injured. Caleb began healing Bane's body, and after several days his condition stabilized. He would survive, but Zannah had never intended to surrender her master to the Jedi. Just before the Jedi arrived, she put her real plan into action.
Using Sith sorcery, she attacked Dervit's mind, driving him completely insane until he became a raving lunatic seeing monsters everywhere. Then she killed Caleb and staged the scene to look like a brutal Sith attack, giving the insane Dervit a Jedi Master's distinctive golden lightsaber. She used an advanced concealment technique to hide herself and the recovering Bane in a small cellar beneath Caleb's shack, and the dark side trick masked their presence completely. Upon the Jedi strike team's arrival, they found exactly what she had arranged: Caleb's corpse, a raving madman wielding a Jedi lightsaber, and 5 lightsaber hilts as trophies from the Jedi who died on Tython. The Master Jedi leading the team quickly pieced together what he believed happened, concluding that the young man was the Sith Lord who had killed the others. When Dervit attacked in his insanity, the Jedi cut him down in seconds. Master Thonatan reported back to the Jedi Council with complete confidence that the last Sith Lord had been killed on Ambria, and the Jedi never thought to check beneath the sleeping mat or notice the trap door. They never sensed the 2 Sith hiding meters below their feet, completely concealed by sorcery. 3 days after the Jedi left, Zannah repaired their ship and loaded her master aboard. When Bane woke, he was initially furious, accusing her of betraying him by sending that message to the Jedi. As she calmly explained what she actually did, how she manipulated everyone and eliminated all witnesses while the Sith operated unseen, Bane's anger faded into recognition of the brilliance of her plan. She had saved his life while securing the most valuable thing the Sith possessed: complete secrecy. But Zannah wasn't content with simple praise. She reminded him that he still had much to teach, making clear she intended to absorb everything he knew, and once he was no longer useful, she would destroy him. She stated it directly. One day she would surpass him and kill him to claim the title of Sith Master, but that day had not yet arrived. Her master saw the truth in her words and approved of her ambition because it proved she truly embraced the Sith philosophy. Only the stronger would survive that confrontation, and this was the rule of 2 working exactly as Darth Revan had envisioned. The Sith had survived their greatest crisis, and the Jedi believed them extinct. In the shadows, Darth Bane and Darth Zannah continued preparing for a war that would take 1,000 years to win. 20 years later, in 980 BBY, the rule of 2 faced a test that challenged its very foundation. 2 decades after Ambria, Bane's body was failing. Decades of channeling dark side power had taken their toll, and his left hand developed an uncontrollable tremor. This should have been the natural order. The master weakens, the apprentice challenges, the stronger survives, and the Sith grow more powerful. But Bane discovered something that made him question everything he had built. On the deep core world of Prakith, he found Darth Anderu's holocron, an artifact containing the secret of essence transfer. This ritual would let the Sith abandon their dying body and transfer their consciousness into a new vessel, the secret of eternal life that he desperately wanted. This was the ultimate betrayal of his own philosophy, because by seeking immortality, the Master was trying to cheat the system he created. The apprentice was supposed to replace the Master, which is how the Sith grew stronger. But if the Master never died, the rule of 2 became meaningless. He sent Zannah to the mining world of Doan to investigate a Jedi death, a convenient distraction, while he traveled to Prakith and claimed the holocron. But someone on Doan had been waiting, a person with a personal grudge. Sarah was Caleb's daughter, and 20 years earlier, before he was Darth Bane, he had been Sergeant Dessel, a Republic soldier who saved her life multiple times. She was torn between loyalty to Sarah and the debt she owed to her former commander.
Lucia made a choice that would cost her everything.
secretly injecting Bane with a stimulant that counteracted the sedative, knowing he would escape and probably kill Sarah. He broke free and killed over 10 guards during his brutal escape, though he was still affected by the lingering substances and didn't have his lightsaber because the Huntress had taken it. Zannah arrived at the stone prison and sensed him inside. She entered alone, ready for their final confrontation. Sarah, realizing Bane had escaped, activated the self-destruct sequence, giving everyone only 5 minutes to escape. 3 separate confrontations unfolded at once in the collapsing prison. Bane encountered Lucia in the hallways, and she begged him to spare her life, but he rejected his past identity completely, feeling no pity, gratitude, or regret. As he gathered force power to kill his former colleague, Zannah attacked with a massive force wave. Bane shielded himself, but Lucia, who had no force abilities, was thrown violently against the walls and killed instantly, her body tumbling 30 meters down the corridor. In the prison hangar, Seth Harth fought the Huntress after stealing Ondedu's holocron from an office safe. As the self-destruct countdown continued, he destroyed 2 shuttles and threatened to trap them both unless she let him leave, and the Huntress agreed to let Set escape with the stolen holocron. Zannah confronted her master in the collapsing prison corridors, armed with her double-bladed lightsaber, while Bane was completely unarmed and still affected by the substances. Despite this, he was still incredibly dangerous. The prison collapsed around them as they fought, and Zannah used Sith sorcery to create mental attacks from his repressed memories, but he had conquered those fears decades ago. He channeled the terror into rage and destroyed the illusions. Then she tried something different, drawing dark side power from the prison itself. Wispy smoke rose from the floor and twisted into writhing tentacles several meters long, not physical objects, but pure dark side energy. His lightsaber passed through them with no effect, and when a tendril brushed his shoulder, his clothes and a chunk of flesh simply dissolved. The pain was worse than anything he had experienced. Not just physical pain, but the empty chill of the void itself, the horror of absolute nothingness. Zannah was vulnerable while maintaining the tendrils because the effort pushed her force abilities to their absolute limit, slowing her reactions. This allowed Bane to charge directly at her, weaving between the tendrils, and his leg sweep took her feet out from under her. As she fell, he grabbed the double-bladed weapon from her grasp, and she was now unarmed and helpless at his feet. As he raised his arm for the killing blow, one of her dark side tendrils intercepted mid-swing and wrapped around his elbow, dissolving his entire forearm instantly. The severed arm fell to the ground, and the pain was so intense that he couldn't scream. He collapsed, and everything went black. In his last moment, he reached out with his remaining hand and clutched Zannah's wrist, invoking the ritual of essence transfer with his last act. The ritual worked at the speed of thought, and Bane's physical body was consumed by heat, reduced to ashes in a fraction of a second. His consciousness was no longer in his body, but suddenly aware of his surroundings through Zannah's senses. He could see with her eyes, hear with her ears, and feel through her skin. However, his apprentice was still there too, and when she screamed in horror, he screamed with her. The black tendrils vanished as Zannah's concentration shattered, and their 2 identities locked together inside her mind, fighting for possession of her body.
Bane sought to erase all trace of her identity, while Zannah sought to cast him down into nothingness. They were evenly matched, neither gaining ground, until suddenly it was over. The huntress, who had become Darth Cognus, watched from a safe distance and had witnessed the entire battle. She saw Bane's arms severed. Then came a flash of light so bright she had to close her eyes.
When she looked back, Bane's body was gone, just a pile of ash, and the blonde woman was still on the ground, dazed but alive. There was only one place his consciousness could have gone, into the woman. Zannah shifted and rose slowly, moving awkwardly as if unfamiliar with her own body. She shook her head, stood straight, and fixed Cognus with a cold stare. Cognus asked whether this was Lord Bane standing before her, and the woman replied that Bane was gone, identifying herself as Darth Zannah, the new Dark Lord of the Sith and Cognus's new master. As Cognus dropped to one knee, Zannah explained that Bane had given her the name Cognus, meaning knowledge and the ability to see the future, and she would teach her the rule of two and the ways of the Sith. The new Sith Master walked over to pick up her lightsaber and told Cognus to take Bane's curved-hilt weapon. She stood with her back to Cognus, staring across the desert, and spoke about Bane's legacy, about how she was now the master and Cognus her successor. She explained that one day Cognus would face her just as she faced Bane, and only one would survive. This was the way of their order. An individual may die, yet the Sith are eternal. Cognus couldn't help noticing one detail. As the woman was speaking, she was continually clenching and unclenching the fingers of her left hand, exactly the same tremor Bane had exhibited in his left hand. The story ends without a clear answer, never revealing whether Zannah's consciousness survived or whether Bane successfully possessed her body. It doesn't matter, because the Sith Order continues either way, and the rule of two is preserved regardless of the outcome. What we know for certain is that Darth Cognus became the new apprentice, and the person in Zannah's body became the new master. Together they fled as the stone prison collapsed, and the Jedi believed the Sith were extinct when they were tragically wrong. As an Ikotachi, Cognus had natural precognition, meaning she could glimpse possible futures before they arrived and sense danger through the Force. More unusually, she had the rare ability to disrupt the Force connections of others, making Force users nearly unable to defend themselves when she attacked. The apprentice learned the ways of the rule of two from her master, studying in secret and building power slowly, while the galaxy remained ignorant of the Sith's survival. The legend sources never revealed how she challenged Zannah for the title of Sith Master, but she eventually succeeded and needed to find an apprentice worthy of continuing Bane's legacy. She found a three-eyed mutant with extraordinary abilities. The apprentice Cognus chose had rare gifts, including the ability to see glimpses of the future through the Force. As her master, she gave him the Darth title Millennial. But Millennial had a serious problem with everything Bane had built. He looked at the Sith Order limited to only 2 members and hiding in the shadows for generations, and questioned whether this approach actually made them stronger. He believed Darth Khan's Brotherhood of Darkness had the right idea: rule by the strong, many powerful Sith working together instead of just 2. The apprentice became increasingly vocal about these doubts, questioning the rule of 2 repeatedly, and her master recognized the danger. An apprentice who rejected the rule of 2 was no apprentice at all, and their relationship deteriorated until he barely escaped her wrath, fleeing to the planet Dromund Kaas, deep in the unknown regions. There he created something new, developing a religion he called the Dark Force, and proclaiming himself a prophet chosen by the Force itself.
He founded the Prophets of the Dark Side, attracting followers who believed in his vision of rule by the strong rather than rule of two. By rejecting the rule of two, he had separated himself from Bane's succession and was no longer part of the true Sith lineage. For this reason, Cognus took a second apprentice, whose name has never been recorded. The details of her later years and eventual death remain unknown, but the Sith lineage continued through her. What happened in the centuries after Cognus is mostly unknown until around 533 BBY, when a new threat to the rule of two emerged, this time from a master who believed he could perfect it by blending the light side and the dark side together. His name was Darth Gravid, a human Sith Lord whose reign was brief, though the damage he caused would affect the Sith Order for centuries. He became convinced that total commitment to the dark side would sentence the Sith Order to eventual defeat, and he tried to introduce Jedi selflessness and compassion into his Sith teachings, attempting to blend light and dark into something new. Unfortunately, the human mind was never meant to use both sides of the Force, and Gravid was driven increasingly mad by his attempts to merge the two opposing philosophies. His sanity fell apart as he tried to hold contradictory beliefs at the same time, and in his deteriorating mental state, the Sith Lord became convinced that the Sith Order's accumulated knowledge itself was the problem. The texts, holocrons, and treatises that had been passed down through the generations now seemed to him like obstacles to enlightenment rather than tools for power, and he decided they all needed to be destroyed. Gravid locked himself with his apprentice Jean inside a fortress on the planet Giga and raised force fields from preventing interference. Then he began systematically destroying the Sith archives, and the destruction was massive. Gravid succeeded in destroying more than half the repository of artifacts before his apprentice could intervene, burning texts and shattering holocrons until centuries of accumulated Sith wisdom vanished.
Jean saw what her master could not, and showing incredible will and courage, she managed to get through the force fields. The duel ended with the apprentice killing her master with her bare hands, but the cost of victory was terrible. She lost her arm, shoulder, and the entire left side of her face and chest in the battle, becoming the new Dark Lady of the Sith, though her body was shattered and she would spend the rest of her life dependent on prosthetics. But she accomplished what mattered most. The Sith Order survived. The damage her former master inflicted on Sith knowledge could never be fully repaired, and crucial knowledge had been lost. Techniques and rituals perfected over thousands of years existed now only as fragments or not at all, forcing a major change in how the Sith preserve their teachings. With so many written records destroyed, future masters had to pass knowledge directly to their apprentices through training sessions that were never recorded, and oral tradition became a necessity rather than a choice. His actions set the Sith back countless years, and generations of Sith Lords after the Dark Lady would struggle to reconstruct what had been lost. Nevertheless, the rule of two itself endured, and she proved that sometimes the apprentice must strike not from ambition but from necessity, not to seize power but to save the order itself. The centuries following Jean's reign are poorly documented, but according to the Darth Plagueis novel, the lineage from Bane continued through the generations that it included Cognus, Vectivus, Ramage, and Tenebris. Somewhere in those lost centuries lived Darth Vectivus, who once served as director of mining operations when he made an unusual discovery on an asteroid under his supervision: the ancient remains of a midichlorian-like species that had lived on dark side energy. The man fell prey to those dark side energies himself and became a Sith Lord, taking the name Darth Vectivus.
What makes him remarkable among Sith Lords is not what he did, but what he didn't do. Vectivus did not conquer star systems and wipe out entire populations, but came into his power having led a fairly normal life as a successful businessman. He simply used his power to build a successful and vast fortune before and after becoming a Sith Lord. And even more unusually, Vectivus died of old age, which is almost unheard of for a Sith Lord. The rule of two demanded that the apprentice eventually kill the master, but sources indicate he lived out his natural lifespan surrounded by friends and family before dying of old age. Vectivus proved the rule of two could accommodate different approaches to power, as not every Sith Lord needed to be a conqueror or destroyer. Some could operate through business, wealth, and influence while still advancing the Sith's ultimate goals. Later in the timeline came another Sith scientist, Darth Ramage, identified as a Sith scientist whose specialty was research into force-enhancing substances and experimental force techniques. He created a holocron containing instructions about scientific applications of the Force, and based on sources, he was an exceptionally skilled and particularly ruthless Sith, whose work centered on the destructive use of power and was steeped in darkness. Ramage's research focused on several areas, including experiments in the manipulation of time. He theorized that time manipulation would require a network of powerful minds working together, but for dark side practitioners, fear, trust, and ambition made cooperation impossible. The rule of two, limiting the Sith to only 2 members, made his ultimate goal impossible. The sources are clear about Ramage's methods, stating that his evil was beyond measure. The Sith Lord's knowledge about time manipulation came at the expense of hundreds, perhaps even thousands of Siphilon lives and minds, as Siphilons are a species with unique mental abilities. He tortured and killed hundreds or possibly thousands of sentient beings to steal their abilities for his research. Ramage's holocron reflected his evil nature, sealed with blood, and requiring the blood of a sentient being to open, most likely a Force user. The amount needed would be significant enough to the person providing it, so only someone willing to commit a dark act could access his knowledge. Ramage's reputation survived for approximately 1,000 years, and even centuries later, he was remembered as one of the most brilliant Sith scientists in history. He represented the scientific and experimental branch of Sith philosophy, and where earlier Sith Lords like Bane and Zannah focused on combat and sorcery, Ramage treated the Force itself as a phenomenon to be studied and manipulated through the scientific method. The lineage would continue through Ramage to eventually reach Darth Tenebrous, a Bith, whose species was legendary for intellectual ability. Between 167 and 124 BBY, an unnamed Twi'lek Sith Lord trained a Bith scientist named Ruusan Nome, and this master accomplished something that would reshape the coming decades. For the first time in more than 800 years since the Battle of Ruusan, he opened a small rend in the fabric of the Force, allowing the dark side to be felt by the Jedi Order once again. Whether this was intentional provocation or accidental exposure, sources do not say, but it marked a turning point because the Sith were no longer completely invisible to their enemies.
Eventually, the apprentice killed his master and claimed the title for himself, becoming Darth Tenebrous. As a member of the Bith species, he brought unique advantages to the Sith Order, because the Bith were legendary for their intellectual ability, with massive heads housing brains of extraordinary size and processing power.
Where other species thought in straight lines, the Bith mind worked in vast computational networks, calculating probability streams and future outcomes with startling precision. He took this natural gift and weaponized it for the dark side. Tenebris became a Sith physicist who approached the Force not as mystical energy, but as a natural phenomenon to be studied, measured, and predicted. Through years of analysis and meditation, he developed the ability to see potential futures, but this gift came with a price. The more he studied the future, the more he became convinced of something terrible. His analysis showed him the inevitable end of the Baneite Sith and rule of two, and his calculations indicated the coming of a shadow so vast it would darken the galaxy entirely, marking the end for both Jedi and Sith as the universe had known them. Though the exact nature of this great shadow remained unclear, his calculations detailed the rise of what would become known as the One Sith. A single Sith Lord would arise of such power that he would have no need of any apprentice nor fear of the Jedi. It was a tempting prospect, with only a single problem. Tenebris was not to be that Sith Lord. His own death was clearly shown in the numbers, entirely inevitable, and coming decades before the rise of the shadow. Tenebris realized it might be possible for the numbers to be deceived, and the key lay in an obscure legend referenced in the Journal of the Wills about a hero who was to be born of pure force. After 3 years devoted to exploring all possible interpretations, Tenebris determined such a birth was indeed possible, and with proper execution, this chosen one might have a midichlorian count as high as 15,000, perhaps even more. Midichlorians are microscopic life forms that live inside cells and allow beings to use the Force. And by using subtle variations of the ancient Sith essence transfer technique, Tenebris could ensure his own consciousness would be present at the creation of this being. At the moment of creation, he would seize it and become it. And with this single stroke, decades after his body's death, he would become the most powerful Force user in the history of the galaxy. It was all there in the numbers, and he could not possibly fail. First, he needed the right apprentice, one with very specific skills surrounding the direct perception and manipulation of midichlorian activity. His search led him to the ice world of Munilinst, where a moon administrator named Kar Damask supervised mining operations for the intergalactic banking clan. Moons are tall, thin humanoids known for their financial skills, and Kar was an unrecognized genius with latent Force abilities. Years passed before Tenebris found a lower caste moon female whom he recruited as a disciple. She wasn't strong enough to be an apprentice, but she was strong enough to serve his purpose, and her task was to romance Kar Damask and bear a child, one whom Tenebris's Bith science predicted would be born strong in the Force. In due course, she gave birth to a son they named Higo. Darth Tenebris had planned every moment of this, and for years, Higo's mother monitored every detail of the boy's development, recording everything and encouraging him to share even his most secret thoughts. The boy was not yet 5 years old when he began to sense he was somehow different, not only smarter than his playmates, but able to manipulate them as well. He learned to read intentions and body language with supernatural skill, and as his abilities increased, other children became playthings rather than playmates. One afternoon, a moon youngster pushed past Higo to reach a staircase, and Higo grabbed his peer by the upper arm and made a simple suggestion. If the other boy was in such a rush to get downstairs, then he should jump out the window. Locking glances, Higo repeated the suggestion, and the victim took it to heart. Many questions were asked after the young moon's broken body was discovered in the courtyard, but Higo kept the truth from everyone except his mother. She told him he had a gift that must remain secret, and no one held him responsible for the playmate's death. Soon after, the steady stream of playmates began to dry up, and his father began to grow distant. On several occasions, his father met with Jedi Knights who came in search of Adagan crystals, and Higo had perfected his ability to mask his powers. He sensed in a Jedi a kind of power similar to his own, though clearly across purposes, and from early on he knew he could never be one of them. Even more puzzling was when he came to sense a power closer to his own in a Bith visitor named Ruusan, a starship engineer who arrived in a luminous vessel of his own design. Before long, Higo began to suspect his mother was the reason for Noam's frequent visits, and during one of Noam's visits, Higo was summoned to his father's office.
His father said that Higo was of their blood, though they could no longer raise him as their son. And with a nod toward Noam, he explained that in truth, Higo belonged to their visitor. A decade later, Higo would learn the full truth. While his father had done his best to keep his force abilities to himself, Tenebrous had identified him as a suitable genetic source. His parents safeguarded the secret until his power began to reveal itself, and then a deal was made. Higo would be given up in exchange for Kar Damask's lifelong dream of being accepted into the upper level of the intergalactic banking clan. 5 years later, Kar was recalled to Muna Linst to become director of the Treasury branch, and Higo's mother vanished, never to be seen again. Soon enough, his apprenticeship to Sith Lord Darth Tenebrous began. In addition to being widely respected as a savant engineer, Ruusan headed a shadowy organization that had gathered intelligence on dealings of nearly every criminal, smuggler, and pirate in the galaxy. With young Higo pretending to be Noam's accountant, the two Sith traveled widely, facilitating chaos whenever possible. Tenebrous taught his prentice the core philosophy. The Sith were the unseen opposition, a phantom menace. Where Sith once wore armor, now they wore cloaks, and the Force worked through them all the more powerfully in their invisibility. As the Master explained it, the Jedi had emerged strong from the war 1,000 years earlier, while Darth Bane and later Sith Lords had labored at a disadvantage. Eventually, it was decided that the Sith should hide in plain sight, amassing wealth and knowledge, securing contacts and alliances with groups that would one day form the basis of galaxy-wide opposition to the Republic and Jedi Order. The rift that Tenebrous's master had opened in the fabric of the Force had been felt by the Jedi, and already the Order was beginning to show signs of caution and laziness. The Republic, too, was similarly undermined by encouraging corruption in the Senate and lawlessness in the Outer Rim. This was the path Tenebrous laid out for his apprentice. But over the decades, a deep disagreement grew between the master and the student. Tenebrous approached the Force as a Bith scientist approaches any natural phenomenon, through observation, measurement, and prediction. He believed that with sufficient data and processing power, the Force's will could be predicted and therefore controlled.
The Bith had developed sophisticated algorithms that could forecast political events, economic trends, and even individual decisions,
And he fed these calculations into advanced computers he had designed himself, machines that could process millions of variables to generate probability maps of possible futures. According to Tenebrous' calculations, the Jedi Order would gradually weaken over the coming centuries through internal corruption and complacency. The Republic would slowly rot from within as Senate corruption increased and public faith in government declined. And the Sith needed only to accelerate these natural processes through careful manipulation. He envisioned a future where the Jedi simply faded away, their numbers dwindling as Force-sensitive children were never identified, their political influence eroding as the Senate grew tired of their interference. No grand battle would be necessary, no dramatic confrontation, just patient, scientific application of pressure at calculated points until the entire structure collapsed. On the other hand, his Moon apprentice found this approach flawed, arguing that Tenebrous' equations treated sentient beings as predictable variables when they were anything but predictable. The Force itself, he insisted, was not a mathematical constant, but a living entity that responded to will and emotion in ways no computer could calculate. Where Tenebrous saw the Jedi as a slowly declining organization that could be dismantled through economic and political pressure, his apprentice saw them as an active threat requiring direct confrontation. The Jedi would not simply fade away, but would fight and adapt, and any plan that assumed otherwise was dangerously naive. The Moon believed that the Force did play games of chance with the galaxy, and that randomness and chaos were as much a part of the dark side's nature as order and control. Trying to reduce everything to equations ignored the essential truth that power came not from prediction, but from the willingness to seize opportunities when they arose, regardless of what calculations suggested. Tenebrous dismissed these arguments as the impulsiveness of youth, believing his apprentice had not yet developed the patience to see how seemingly random events were actually part of larger patterns. Given time, the Moon would understand that the Force's apparent chaos was simply complexity beyond his current ability to calculate. But this disagreement would never be resolved. Tenebrous would die believing his apprentice lacked vision, and his apprentice would build an empire believing his master had lacked the courage to truly seize power when the moment demanded it. The shadow Tenebrous had foreseen remained a mystery, and he believed this shadow was the one Sith, a single being so powerful that the rule of two would become useless. His plan to manipulate the Force into creating a chosen one was his attempt to become that shadow himself. What the Sith Lord never considered was that his mathematical models contained a critical mistake. He assumed the shadow would serve the dark side, but never calculated the possibility that the Force might create its own chosen one who would bring balance not by empowering the Sith, but by destroying them entirely. Tenebrous, despite his mathematical brilliance and strategic mind, had made a choice that could have destroyed the entire philosophy Darth Bane created. He trained 2 apprentices at the same time. The second apprentice was a Bith, like Tenebrous himself, named Venomous, and his master gave him the Darth title in secret. The Sith Lord trained him in parallel to his Moon apprentice, keeping the two carefully separated. Tenebrous' reasoning was coldly logical. Through his precognition, he had glimpsed his own death, struck down by his Moon apprentice in what should have been a routine mission, and rather than accept his fate, he decided to prepare a backup plan. Venomous became his secret insurance, and his plan revealed a deep misunderstanding of what made Bane's philosophy effective. Bane hadn't created the rule of two merely to limit numbers, but had designed it to force evolution through life or death pressure. By training 2 apprentices, Tenebris eliminated that pressure entirely, and his distraction over this decision would cost him everything. On Baldemnik in 67 BBY, Tenebris and his moon apprentice traveled to the planet on a mission to survey cortosis deposits, a rare metal that can resist lightsabers. Deep within a cavern, the 2 Sith worked with a mining probe that had been sabotaged. Deep in the cave system, the probe detected a pocket of lethane gas, highly flammable, and the probe's hammering would ignite an explosion. When ordered to stop, the probe refused to respond, and both Sith attempted to stop the probe with force lightning, though the cortosis ore created too much resistance. As a result, Tenebris ordered an immediate retreat, and for the first time in their long partnership, the moon apprentice saw his master afraid. They flew up the tunnel toward the grotto where their ship waited, and 10 meters ahead, Tenebris ducked under a rough outcropping, but his haste brought him upright too quickly. His left shoulder hit the rough rock, shredding part of his suit, and even injured when his apprentice offered to lead, Tenebris's wounded pride made him refuse. At a fork in the tunnel, he took a wrong turn, and they were approaching the grotto when the gas pocket exploded. The blast wave caught them as they entered the cavity, and deep in the tunnel behind them came a muffled but ground-heaving detonation. A rolling fireball surged toward them as they entered the grotto, and Tenebris whirled to face the tunnel, somehow managed to remain on his feet, and created a force shield that met the fireball and contained it. The apprentice was hurled face first to the ground and lifted his head in time to see the underside of the ceiling begin shedding enormous slabs of rock, and directly below the plummeting slabs was their starship. He scrambled to his feet, arms lifted, holding the rocks in mid-air with the force. Tenebris swung around to help, but behind him, the fireball's final flames burst from the tunnel mouth and struck his back, forcing him deeper into the grotto. The cave continued to shake. Cracks spread like a web from the opening overhead, triggering collapses throughout the grotto, and now the master was positioned beneath the fall. In that instant, the apprentice perceived the danger Tenebris had foreseen earlier, his death at his apprentice's hands. While his master was busy holding up the slabs threatening to crush their ship, the moon apprentice quickly changed focus. He aimed his raised hands at the plummeting slabs above the bith and brought them down with a downward motion of both arms, so quickly and with so much momentum that his success in bringing the ceiling on his master proved the bith had grown slow and expendable.
He then raced to Tenebris's side, removing his respirator, and the bith's single lung had been pierced, blood gurgling in his throat. Tenebris managed to say that his apprentice should save his strength, and the Mune held the bith's pained gaze and stated that he did all that he could. The Sith Lord explained that his apprentice was fated to bring the Sith plan to completion, that it fell to him to bring the Jedi Order to its knees, and at long last the mantle is given. Suddenly, the dying bith fell silent, and his apprentice sensed his mind replaying recent events, calculating odds, reaching conclusions. In that moment, Tenebris's black eyes shone with yellow light as his free hand clutched at the ring collar of his apprentice's suit. At last he learned the truth.
His apprentice had sabotaged the mining probe, and the explosion, the cave-in, his positioning beneath the falling rocks, none of it had been an accident. His own student had planned his death. The Mune pried the Bith's thin hand from the fabric and grinned faintly, explaining that Tenebris should go to his grave, knowing he was the last of the old order, the rule of two as Bane intended. The new order would begin now and remain under his control for 1,000 years, and he had no intention of being killed by his own apprentice someday. Tenebris coughed spittle and blood, then acknowledged his apprentice's victory for the last time, praising the skillful use of surprise and misdirection. With a chopping motion of his left hand, the student broke his master's neck, and Tenebris was paralyzed and unconscious, but not yet dead. The Mune had no interest in saving him, only in observing the behavior of the Bith's midichlorians as life faded. The Mune's name was Hago Damask, and he would be known to history as Darth Plagueis. Darth Plagueis was different from every Sith Lord who came before him, because where others sought power through conquest or political control, the Mune banker pursued something far more ambitious. He wanted to control life itself. The Mune banker, known as Hago Damask, lived 2 lives. To the galaxy, he was one of the wealthiest beings in the known systems, chairman of Damask Holdings, who reshaped entire economies. To the Jedi Order, he was simply another powerful corporate figure. But beneath this facade existed something far more dangerous. Plagueis had discovered what ancient Sith texts only hinted at. Midichlorians could be manipulated directly. If successful, this knowledge would grant the ability to create life from nothing and prevent death entirely. Such experiments required resources, secrecy, and time, so he established his primary facility on Abora, a remote island on Munilinst, protected by Sanaward mercenaries. The facility contained a medical laboratory, a vast library, and holding cells for experimental subjects. Shortly after killing Tenebris, Plagueis discovered a problem. His former master had been training a second apprentice in secret, a Bith named Venomous, which broke the rule of two completely. When the two met, Plagueis attacked without warning, manipulating Venomous's own midichlorians against him, and the Bith collapsed unconscious within moments. Plagueis could have killed him, but the Mune saw an opportunity instead, and Venomous represented a perfect test subject. Plagueis had the unconscious Bith transported to Abora and placed in a Bacta tank, a healing liquid, and for over a decade, Venomous would serve as the Mune's living laboratory. The experiments Plagueis conducted on Venomous yielded remarkable insights into the nature of life itself. Through direct midichlorian manipulation, Plagueis discovered he could command these tiny organisms to speed up healing far beyond normal rates. He learned to control cellular repair at will, and most importantly, he found that with enough focus and force power, he could slow or even stop aging completely. The Bith floating in the Bacta tank became living proof that Plagueis's theories worked. Venomous should have died dozens of times from the experiments performed on his body, but Plagueis would cause serious injuries, then use midichlorian manipulation to heal them. He would slow Venomous's heart nearly to a stop, and then restart it, cause organ failure, and then reverse it, and each experiment pushed the limits of what the Force could do through direct biological control. Throughout his experiments, Plagueis learned remarkable knowledge. Midichlorians responded to commands issued through the Force. A Force user could extend their own life forever by constantly renewing their cells at the midichlorian level.
Death from aging could be prevented completely, and even fatal injuries could be healed in moments. Still, this groundbreaking knowledge came at a terrible cost to Venomous. The test subject remained unconscious permanently, his body a tool for Plagueis's ambitions, and for over 11 years he existed in this state, neither truly alive nor dead, kept going only by the Sith's experiments and the Bacta-tank's life support systems. Alongside this, Plagueis conducted experiments in forced conception, attempting to create life through midichlorian manipulation without biological parents. The moon would focus his will on samples of living tissue, trying to cause pregnancies through the force alone, and some experiments showed promising results where cells would divide and early development would begin. These weren't natural processes, but life created through pure manipulation of midichlorians. Despite these initial successes, the Force resisted these efforts. Plagueis began noticing a pattern. Every action created a reaction, and when he pushed too hard, the Force itself seemed to push back. Experiments that should have worked would fail for no clear reason. Tissue samples that showed life would suddenly die, and equipment would break at critical moments. This led to an important realization. The Force kept a balance between light and dark, and as long as the Jedi existed and held on to the light side, the Force would resist any attempt to tip the balance too far toward darkness. Therefore, the Jedi had to be destroyed, not through direct fighting, but through careful manipulation over decades. The facility on Abor represented the peak of centuries of Sith planning, and unlike the Sith Lords before him, who focused on politics and combat, Plagueis treated the dark side like a science to be studied and controlled. The vast library contained texts and holocrons recovered from across the galaxy, many predating the Rule of Two. The medical laboratory held equipment designed specifically for Force experiments, and the holding cells contained other Force-sensitive beings besides Venomous, though none proved as useful as the Bith. When Sidious finally saw the Abor facility years later, he grasped the true scope of his master's ambitions. This wasn't simply a Sith Lord training an apprentice, but a scientist attempting to unlock the deepest secrets of life and death itself. The Force conception experiments, the midichlorian manipulation, the endless testing on Venomous, all of it was part of Plagueis's grand design to achieve immortality and reshape reality according to Sith will. The experiments also revealed why the Rule of Two had been necessary. Such work required absolute secrecy and decades of uninterrupted research, and an army of Sith could never maintain the required discipline. Only two beings, master and apprentice, working in perfect coordination, could accomplish what Plagueis envisioned. For 1,000 years, the Sith had been working in secret, and each generation added to this plan, infiltrating governments and corporations, manipulating trade routes, and creating resentment between the core worlds and the outer rim. By the time Plagueis became a Dark Lord, the Republic was already weakened from within. Plagueis determined that two things remained necessary. First, the Sith needed a human face in the political arena, because only a human could rise to Supreme Chancellor, given the species bias dominating Coruscant. And this human would need to be brilliant, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. Second, the Sith needed an engineer crisis large enough to justify creating an army. In 65 BBY, on the peaceful world of Naboo, Plagueis found what he was looking for: a 17-year-old human named Palpatine, the eldest son of a noble house. On the surface, the teen seemed unremarkable, but the Dark Lord sensed something others missed. The young human had an extraordinarily high midichlorian count and radiated a darkness that he himself didn't fully understand. Without wasting any time, the moon arranged to meet the young human, and their first conversation lasted only minutes, but Plagueis probed gently with the Force.
This human had raw power that rivaled any Force-sensitive being he had encountered, and showed remarkable control for someone with no training. Plagueis began a careful campaign, positioning himself as a mentor figure who could guide Palpatine's political ambitions. Their conversations ranged from politics to philosophy to the nature of power itself, and the Sith Lord never mentioned the Force directly, but simply encouraged Palpatine to embrace his true nature. The transformation happened faster than expected, and within a year, Palpatine's relationship with his family had fallen apart completely. His father, Kosinga, arranged to have his son removed from the university and transported to Chomo Minor, where he would live under supervision. The confrontation occurred aboard the family starship, and Kosinga revealed his plan to essentially imprison his son, leading to an argument. Palpatine's father called him a disappointment and admitted he'd wanted to kill the boy from birth, and his son's response was quiet but final. The walls he'd built around his power for 17 years suddenly collapsed, and what happened next was pure violence. Palpatine unleashed the full fury of the dark side for the first time, the Force exploding outward from him, buckling bulkheads and hurling his father against walls with bone-breaking force. His mother and siblings died as the ship's structure warped around them, and when the massacre ended, 6 people lay dead. The young human had killed his entire family with his mind and his bare hands. Following this, he contacted Darth Plagueis, who immediately sent Senard mercenaries to destroy all evidence. The bodies were disposed of in deep space, and Palpatine was quietly returned with the perfect alibi. Plagueis knew what the massacre truly meant. The dark side had claimed the young man completely, and he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This was exactly the test Plagueis had been waiting for, and now the time had come. The Sith Lord arranged another meeting, and though the conversation began with Palpatine's anger as he accused the moon of manipulating him, Plagueis didn't deny it, but calmly explained that manipulation was necessary. Then the moon told him about the Sith, explaining that they were the true inheritors of the Force. He described the ancient conflict and revealed that the Sith had been operating in secret for 1,000 years, carefully manipulating galactic events toward a single goal: the complete destruction of the Jedi Order and the Republic they served. Palpatine listened in stunned silence as everything suddenly made sense, and Plagueis was offering him something no one else could, a chance to reshape the galaxy itself. Without hesitation, Palpatine knelt before the moon and spoke the words that bound him to the Sith Order. Plagueis placed his hand on the young human's head and completed the ritual, and from that day forward he would be known as Darth Sidious. The education began and continued for the next 11 years. The Sith Master took his apprentice to dozens of worlds, and the training was brutal by design, because he believed the dark side revealed itself only to those who truly suffered. The lessons extended beyond physical conditioning, and the Master taught his apprentice to see every living being as either a tool or an obstacle. Sidious learned to manipulate others through their emotions, studied politics and economics, and practiced hiding his true nature.
The relationship between them evolved during these years because the elder Sith avoided the traditional approach of withholding knowledge. He shared freely and encouraged his student to question him because he wanted a true partner rather than a resentful subordinate. This openness served a practical purpose because the master knew his experiments were dangerous and having a powerful apprentice provided insurance. If something happened during his experiments, his student could continue the work. By 54 BBY, the young Sith had transformed completely. His control over the Force had grown massively, and most impressively, he had mastered the art of concealment. No Jedi who met him ever sensed the darkness beneath his civilized exterior. Meanwhile, the political pieces continued moving into position. Senator Vidar Kim represented Naboo in the Galactic Senate until tragedy struck. His family died in a suspicious speeder crash carried out through intermediaries. And the Maladian assassins struck while Kim was traveling, killing the senator instantly. Before Kim's son, Ronar, a Jedi Knight, could question her, the Maladian killed herself with poison. Within weeks, the young politician was appointed to represent Naboo, and at 28 years old, he became one of the youngest senators in the Republic's history. The appointment brought Sidious to Coruscant permanently, and his public persona maintained the image of an idealistic young senator while he studied the Senate's weaknesses and assembled a network of supporters. Then came a crisis that would test everything. Senator Pack's team and the Grand Protectorate suspected the Naboo senator worked directly for Hago Damask, and the team's agents lured him into a trap and transported him to an abandoned factory, intending to send a message by killing him. The Sith apprentice remained calm throughout, and before he could act, Senard mercenaries crashed through the window. His master had been monitoring the situation from the beginning and had dangled him as bait on purpose. It was another test. The revenge was swift. The young Sith took his master's lightsaber and traveled to the Malastar embassy, moving through the building systematically.
Every guard died within seconds, and by the time he reached the banquet hall where Pack's team and the senior Gron officials had gathered, dozens of corpses littered the building. Something else happened that night while Sidious dealt with the Gron. His master had been attending an initiation ceremony that became an ambush. The hooded members were actually Maladian assassins in disguise, and a blade caught the moon in the side of the neck, taking away a large chunk of jawbone and cutting his windpipe. What followed showed his true power. Despite his terrible injuries, he launched himself to his feet and unleashed the full fury of the dark side. When he tried to summon lightning, his second heart, moons have two, failed from the strain. He rallied again, but his arms and shoulders were slashed, and he was moments from being overwhelmed when Sidious burst into the room with his aid. Together they brought swift death to the remaining assassins. The Sith Master survived, but was permanently changed. The injuries to his throat and jaw never healed properly, and he would wear a breathing mask for the rest of his life. More importantly, the attack had shaken his confidence. He finally saw the truth. The Force was pushing back. All his experiments in midichlorian manipulation had crossed boundaries the Force wouldn't allow, and the Maladians were merely the tool. This led to new understanding. The Force kept a balance between light and dark, and as the Jedi grew more passive, the dark side grew stronger in response. The reverse was also true. If the Sith pushed too hard, the Force would engineer circumstances to restore balance. The solution was patience and precision. They had to wait for moments when the light side faltered, and only then could they act without fear of consequences.
1 month after the attacks, the elder Sith summoned his apprentice to Moon Ylinst and took him to the island facility on Ebora. What the young Sith found there exceeded anything he'd imagined. The facility radiated dark side energy like a beacon, with a vast library of texts and holocrones, a medical laboratory, cages containing experimental creatures, and a corridor lined with cells holding force-sensitive beings. At the center of it all was Venomous, floating in a towering Bacta tank kept in a permanent coma. He'd been the Master's primary test subject for over 11 years. The Moon finally explained his ultimate goal, telling his apprentice about the experiments in force conception, about his success in creating life through midichlorian manipulation without biological parents, about pregnancies achieved through the force alone. He also explained the consequences. The Force had resisted these efforts violently, and he now knew that controlling life and death required winning the Force's cooperation. That was why the Jedi had to be destroyed, because as long as the Order existed and kept its hold on the light side, the Force would resist any attempt to tip the balance. The Jedi weren't just political obstacles, but barriers preventing the Sith from achieving true mastery. The plan going forward was clear. The Master would continue his research while healing. San Hill would be taught to control the intergalactic banking clan, essential for financing the coming war. The Sith would begin funding weapons makers and encouraging conflicts in the Outer Rim. Sidious would serve as the blade driven through the heart of the Senate, while his master served as the guide from the shadows. Together, they would be partners working toward a shared goal. The elder Sith had no intention of training a successor who would eventually kill him. His goal was immortality, and through midichlorian manipulation, they would keep each other alive forever. They would command the Force itself and extend their reign without end, and the rule of two would end with them, not because one would kill the other, but because death itself would be conquered. The years that followed tested this vision in ways neither Sith Lord expected. While traveling through the Outer Rim on business, Sidious visited the planet Dathomir. In a settlement market, he encountered a Night Sister who carried a humanoid infant. The infant was a male Zabrak, his hairless head covered with small horns, his body tattooed in red and black patterns. The woman explained she had birthed twins and wanted to save one from the clutches of the Night Sisters. The infant was strong in the Force, and Sidious accepted the child, learning his name was Maul before the woman disappeared into the crowd. When Sidious reported the discovery to his master, the Moon saw potential. The infant could be trained as an assassin, not an apprentice, or someone who could aspire to become a true Sith Lord, but simply a disposable tool for tasks too dangerous to risk their own exposure. Maul was to be hardened to pain from infancy and raised to be fierce yet utterly loyal. For the next 20 years, Sidious shaped the infant into the perfect killer.
Maul survived dangerous missions, endured starvation, and faced assassin droids in combat. By age 10, he was fighting in gladiatorial matches on Orsis, in battles to the death that left scars across his body, and by 12, he was champion. The abandoned Lemurge building on Coruscant became his home and training center, and Sidious molded him into an assassin with one purpose: to serve his master and destroy the Jedi. Sidious gave him the title of Darth, not for surviving these trials, but for his obedience and loyalty. Palpatine's political career flourished during these years as he became known as a voice for reform, and behind closed doors he assembled a network of supporters: San Hill, Kinman Doriana, Wilhuff Tarkin, and Sly Moore. Each served a specific purpose.
The Trade Federation grew more aggressive under Sith manipulation, and Newt Gunray rose to become viceroy, guided by suggestions from a mysterious figure who called himself Darth Sidious. For the first time in 1,000 years, a Sith Lord had identified himself by title to someone outside the Order. Supreme Chancellor Valorum struggled to maintain order as the galaxy descended into chaos, and his administration became caught up in scandal, most of which had been carefully planted by Sith agents. Then the Naboo crisis occurred. The Trade Federation, following Sidious's orders, imposed a blockade around the peaceful planet. Queen Amidala found herself trapped between corporate greed and senatorial incompetence, and in an attempt to negotiate, the Queen secretly sent 2 Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, their presence complicated everything. When Sidious ordered the Nymordians to kill the Jedi, they panicked and launched a full invasion ahead of schedule. Amidala escaped with the Jedi's help, though her ship was damaged and forced to land on Tatooine for repairs. There, Qui-Gon encountered a 9-year-old slave boy named Anakin Skywalker. The boy had remarkable abilities, and most importantly, his midi-chlorian count was higher than any Jedi had ever recorded. The Jedi Master became convinced the boy was the chosen one spoken of in ancient prophecy. Back on Coruscant, the Sith Master monitoring events felt a chill when he learned about the boy. He stretched out with the Force and received a vision of overwhelming power. Fierce battles, clashing lightsabers, a black-helmeted cyborg rising from the operating table. This child would change the course of history unless Qui-Gon Jinn died before he could train the boy. Therefore, Sidious sent Maul to Tatooine to kill the Jedi and capture the Queen. Once the Zabrak assassin confronted Qui-Gon Jinn in the desert and ignited his red-bladed lightsaber, the brief duel that followed ended with the Queen's ship escaping, but the damage was done. Maul had been revealed as a Sith, and the Jedi now knew their ancient enemy had returned. Amidala traveled to Coruscant to plead for help, and Palpatine, playing his role perfectly, filled her head with doubts about Valorum's competence and suggested that only a vote of no confidence could save her planet. When Amidala addressed the Senate and called for Valorum's removal, chaos erupted, and Palpatine's name was placed in nomination for Supreme Chancellor. With the political wheels in motion, Amidala returned to Naboo to fight for her world, forming an alliance with the Gunjans and launching a desperate battle. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi joined the palace assault and encountered Darth Maul in the hangar bay. The battle reached its climax in the generator room, where Maul used a force push to separate the 2 Jedi, and the Padawan found himself trapped behind an energy barrier, forced to watch helplessly as Qui-Gon Jinn faced the Sith assassin alone. In a moment of opening, Maul drove his lightsaber through Qui-Gon's torso, and the Jedi Master fell, mortally wounded. Victory made Maul careless, and by the time the barriers cycled open, Obi-Wan attacked with fury born of grief. The young Padawan managed to disarm his opponent, but that moment of hesitation was Maul's undoing. Obi-Wan used the Force to summon Qui-Gon's fallen lightsaber, and as the blade ignited, he cut Maul in half at the waist, causing his body to fall into the shaft in 2 pieces. 20 years of training ended in a single moment of overconfidence, and Sidious felt the death through the Force from thousands of light years away. The same day that Naboo celebrated its victory, Senator Palpatine was elected Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. With Supreme Court judges presiding, he took the oath of office atop the Senate podium, and in his inaugural address he pledged to return the Republic to its former glory. The assembled senators applauded enthusiastically, none of them realizing they had just elected the dark side itself to lead them.
That evening, the newly elected Chancellor visited Higo Damask's penthouse to celebrate. The two Sith Lords had won, and against all odds, they had achieved what seemed impossible. A Sith apprentice now controlled the Republic. They drank expensive wine and discussed the future, with the younger Sith preparing remarks about honoring his master's contributions and ruling together as partners. The night wore on as bottle after bottle was opened, and the moon's weariness grew as the wine took effect. Plagueis never saw the betrayal coming. As his eyes began to close, as his breathing slowed and his defenses lowered for the first time in 20 years, his apprentice made his move. Crackling blue lightning erupted from Sidious's fingertips, and the force attack grounded itself on the moon's breathing device. His eyes snapped open in shock, and he gathered the force around him, then stopped, simply gazing at his student with an expression of surprise and perhaps challenge. The apprentice unleashed another wave of lightning, and as his master struggled for breath, he spoke, explaining that he had never intended to share power. Everything had been manipulated from the beginning, and the partnership had been an illusion maintained for one purpose only: to extract all of the elder Sith's knowledge and then discard him. The betrayal was complete, and the younger Sith mocked his dying master with a litany of complaints, explaining that no true Sith could ever care about another. The rule of two demanded this outcome, and the moon had been a fool to think that things could be different. As his master's body convulsed, Sidious made clear he had won because he was the better Sith, more patient, more cunning, more ruthless. The elder Sith slid to the floor and died, and his decades of work on achieving immortality meant nothing in the end. Darth Plagueis the Wise had failed to realize that wisdom alone was not enough, and power demanded constant vigilance, while trust was a weakness. Sidious had finally claimed his victory, and he stood at the window looking out over Coruscant as dawn broke. His spirit soared briefly, then fell, as something was shading his sense of triumph, a vague awareness of a power greater than himself. Outside, the summits of the tallest buildings were gilded by the first rays of daylight, and a new day was dawning for him, for the Sith, and for the galaxy. The official story would be simple. Higo Damask had died from a malfunction in his breathing apparatus, and no autopsy would be performed. Senator Palpatine would gain even greater sympathy, his joy at being elected diminished by the sudden death of a powerful ally. The Supreme Chancellor traveled to Naboo for Queen Amidala's victory celebration as his first official duty, and he stood among Yoda, Mace Windu, and other Jedi Masters at Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral, watching the Jedi Master's body reduced to ash. He knew it was just the first casualty in a war that had not yet begun, a war in which 10,000 Jedi would follow Qui-Gon to the grave. The larger concern was Anakin Skywalker. This 9-year-old child was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, something dangerous, something the Force itself might have created, and the Dark Lord knew what needed to be done. The boy was too young to be trained in Sith arts right away, but he was the perfect age to bond with a father figure, someone who would listen to all his troubles and coax him slowly toward the dark side over years of careful manipulation. Palpatine would let the Jedi train his future apprentice. He would let Obi-Wan Kenobi instruct Anakin in the ways of the Force. He would let the boy grow bitter as his mother aged in slavery, as the galaxy deteriorated around him, and as his fellow Jedi fell to endless conflicts that the Sith Lord himself would orchestrate.
Several weeks later, the Chancellor invited Obi-Wan Kenobi and the young Padawan Anakin Skywalker to his office. The conversation was brief and formal as he studied the boy carefully, looking for the signs of the power he knew existed within. When Anakin mentioned growing up on Tatooine, Obi-Wan corrected him right away, saying Jedi were trained to live in the moment. The Supreme Chancellor noted the tension between master and apprentice with satisfaction. As the two Jedi left, he made a private promise. He would follow Anakin Skywalker's career with great interest and position himself as a mentor and friend. When the time was right, when the galaxy was consumed by war, he would reveal the truth, that the Republic's salvation was actually its doom, that democracy had been replaced by tyranny, and that the Sith had finally, after 1,000 years of planning, achieved their revenge.
But the Force had its own plans. For all of the Moon's experiments in creating life, for all of his attempts to bend the midichlorians to his will, the Force had responded. A boy with no father, born on a desert slave world at the edge of civilized space, a child whose midichlorian count shattered every recorded measurement. This 9-year-old boy wasn't just another Force-sensitive child. He was the Force's answer to a millennium of Sith manipulation. The Dark Lord believed he had won. He believed he controlled the galaxy's destiny. He was right about everything, except one thing. The Force maintains its own balance. Standing in the Supreme Chancellor's office that day was the instrument through which balance would eventually be restored. The age of the Jedi was ending, and the age of the Empire was about to begin. In 32 BBY, after murdering Darth Plagueis, Palpatine became the sole Sith Master. According to the ancient rule of two, he now needed an apprentice to continue the lineage Bane had established 1,000 years earlier. The Dark Lord already had one in mind. Count Dooku had left the Jedi Order a decade earlier, and in 42 BBY, the disillusioned Jedi contacted Master Yoda through hologram to inform him of his decision. Count Ramal of Sereno had died during the Abyssin invasion, and the former Jedi felt responsible for rebuilding his homeworld as heir to the House of Sereno. He told Yoda the Republic was changing, pointing to how the Senate refused to help Sereno against the Abyssin, yet would eagerly assist in processing the planet's newly discovered resources. The Jedi had become enforcers for a corrupt system rather than servants of the Force. Yoda accepted his departure with sadness, but allowed him to keep his lightsaber, and the Count told his companions to inform Rael and Qui-Gon Jinn, his former Padawans, that the Force would be with them always. What Dooku didn't know was that Sidious had been manipulating him long before he left the Order. Years earlier, while still a Jedi, the Count had traveled to the dark side world of Asu Soto with 2 other Jedi. The planet was a nexus point, saturated with dark side energy, and an insectoid cult called the Provokingers of Hakote captured the 3 Jedi and subjected them to a ritual meant to reveal all possible futures. Dooku was overwhelmed with visions that showed him glimpses of wars, battles across thousands of worlds, and clone soldiers executing Jedi. Among these visions, he heard a voice identifying itself as Darth Sidious. The voice said he had chosen him as his apprentice, and the Count saw himself responding and calling this figure Master. He saw force lightning crackling from his own hands, and a woman with bone-white skin who would one day serve him. The visions showed the Sith returned, just as they showed the Jedi potentially becoming conquerors themselves. When the visions ended, the Count's hands were surrounded by crackling force lightning. He had unleashed it instinctively, killing the Provokingers. His Jedi companions told him this was not his doing, but the dark side using him as a tool.
and they performed a cleansing ritual and explained the visions were only possibilities, not certainties. Master Leen Kostana assured him the future he saw would not come to pass, calling him a good man. She was wrong about everything. After leaving the Order, Dooku returned to Serenno and became its ruler, and the mysterious hooded man from his visions continued to contact him. By the time of the Naboo crisis in 32 BBY, the fallen Jedi was already working with Darth Sidious on a secret project involving the planet Kamino and a clone army. When Qui-Gon Jinn reported encountering a Sith Lord on Tatooine, the Jedi Council was skeptical, and Jedi archivist Jocasta Nu dismissed Qui-Gon's claim, suggesting Qui-Gon had an overactive imagination. The Council did not want to cause unnecessary alarm, but Dooku, on the other hand, believed his former Padawan and told Qui-Gon he had been warning the Council about coming darkness for years, but they refused to listen. The Count and Qui-Gon met one final time, standing at a tree where the Elder used to bring the young Qui-Gon during his training. Dooku was worried about his former aperture facing the Sith, saying he would not be there to protect him. But the Jedi Master reassured him that Obi-Wan filled that role. This peaceful conversation they shared would be their final moment together. Days later, Qui-Gon Jinn was killed by Darth Maul on Naboo, and the death of his former Padawan became the final push to darkness. Shortly after Qui-Gon's funeral, the Count confronted Sidious and accused the Sith Lord of allowing Maul to kill Qui-Gon. Sidious responded coldly that Dooku had lost an aperture, and so had he, referring to Maul's death at Obi-Wan's hands. The galaxy would be remade without sacrifice. The Count acknowledged what he had already done, listing his crimes: Sifo Dyas, Kamino, and the clones. He had betrayed everyone and everything he knew. Using Master Sifo Dyas's security clearance, the fallen Jedi had deleted all records of Kamino from the Jedi archives, and he was deeply involved in the conspiracy to create a clone army in secret. Master Yaddle of the Jedi Council had followed him, and he discovered him meeting with the Sith Lord and declared, "This will end." Then she revealed something unexpected. She had stepped down from the Council because the Count had been right about so many things. The Council should have listened to his warnings, and Qui-Gon did not have to die.
Yaddle validated everything he believed and offered him redemption, telling him there was still a chance to make things right. Sidious saw an opportunity to test his potential apprentice's loyalty and ordered the Count to kill her. At first, Dooku hesitated and admitted he was afraid, and Yaddle said she knew and that she feared it was too late for him. When the Jedi Master moved to leave, he accused her of running back to the Council, and she responded that it was he who had run into the arms of evil. Right at that moment, the Count ignited his lightsaber. Yaddle tried to reason with him, insisting she was on his side, but he told her he wanted only to bring peace and order to the galaxy. Yaddle pointed out that so many had already suffered for what he called order, and his final words before striking her down were that he would give her peace. With Master Yaddle's murder, the Count became Darth Tyrannus. Sidious praised him for doing well, calling him apprentice and friend, and the Count responded by calling Sidious Master. The transformation from disillusioned Jedi to Sith Lord was complete. He had murdered a Jedi Master who agreed with his criticisms of the Council, who had stepped down because he was right, and who had offered him a path back to the light. For the next decade, Darth Tyrannus worked in secret to weaken the Republic, while publicly maintaining his identity as Count of Serenno. He became the public face of the separatist movement, uniting star systems and powerful corporations under a single banner.
The Trade Federation, Banking Clan, Techno-Union, and other corporate entities pledged their droid armies to his cause. His criticisms of the Republic were real and struck a chord across the Outer Rim. Core world favoritism, taxation without representation, and Senate corruption had created genuine complaints. What the Separatist leaders didn't know was that the Count was pushing them toward war under Sidious's direction. The conflict was designed not to achieve Separatist independence, but to give Supreme Chancellor Palpatine emergency powers while exhausting both sides. Tyrannus also trained dark side assassins, though he could not make them true Sith apprentices. The most notable was Asajj Ventress, a Dathomirian warrior he trained to serve him without question. When Sidious sensed Ventress growing too powerful, he ordered Tyrannus to eliminate her, showing the harsh reality of the rule of two. No matter how useful or loyal Ventress had been, she threatened the Sith hierarchy, and Tyrannus betrayed her and left her for dead, though she survived. By 19 BBY, Tyrannus had fulfilled his purpose. The Clone Wars had given Palpatine the emergency powers he needed. The Jedi were scattered across the galaxy and vulnerable, and most importantly, Anakin Skywalker had been pushed to the edge of darkness and was ready for his final fall. Sidious no longer needed his current apprentice, and the trap was set aboard the Invisible Hand, General Grievous's flagship during the Battle of Coruscant. Sidious allowed himself to be captured by his own forces, knowing Anakin and Obi-Wan would come to rescue the Chancellor. When the two Jedi burst into the observation room, they found Palpatine bound to a chair, appearing helpless. The Chancellor warned them that the Count was a Sith Lord, and they were no match for him. Obi-Wan refused to admit defeat, reminding Palpatine that their specialty was dealing with Sith Lords. When Tyrannus demanded they surrender their lightsabers to avoid making a mess, the Jedi Master insisted they would not let him escape. The duel began with Tyrannus fighting both Jedi at once, and he blocked their attacks masterfully, even pausing mid-combat to say he had been looking forward to this confrontation. He used the Force to push Obi-Wan back, then later force-choked him and threw him against the railing. As Obi-Wan fell unconscious, Tyrannus used the Force to drop a section of the platform onto his body, pinning him. An infuriated Anakin faced Tyrannus alone, and the Sith Lord sensed great fear, hate, and anger in him, noting something like disappointment that the Jedi never used these emotions. Provoked by this observation, Anakin became more aggressive in his attacks and overwhelmed Tyrannus's elegant defense with raw power fueled by rage. The turning point came swiftly, with a devastating series of strikes, and Anakin severed both Tyrannus's hands at the wrists. The Count's lightsaber flew through the air, and effortlessly the Jedi caught it and crossed both blades at Tyrannus's neck. As the Sith Lord knelt helplessly, Palpatine's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He congratulated Anakin repeatedly, urging him to kill the Sith Lord now. Tyrannus looked up at his master as he started to realize that he was nothing but a pawn for his plans. Anakin hesitated, believing he should not do this, but Palpatine remained firm, simply commanding him to do it. In the end, the Chancellor's orders forced Anakin to execute the defenseless prisoner. Afterward, Anakin expressed regret, saying Tyrannus had been an unarmed prisoner, and killing him was not the Jedi way.
Palpatine dismissed these concerns by pointing out that Tyrannus had cut off Anakin's arm years earlier on Geonosis, and revenge was natural. He reminded Anakin of what happened to his mother and the Sand People. They needed to leave before more security droids arrived. Darth Tyrannus died, and all his years of service, all his sacrifices, all his belief that he was helping to reshape the galaxy had been a lie. He was simply a stepping stone to Anakin's corruption and fall to the dark side.
From the Rule of Two's perspective, Tyrannus served as Sidious's apprentice for about 13 years, from 32 BBY to 19 BBY. He had been used for orchestrating the Clone Wars and positioning Palpatine for absolute power, and when a more powerful apprentice became available, Sidious discarded him without hesitation. The Rule of Two continued, with Sidious now seeking his ultimate apprentice, Anakin Skywalker, who would become Darth Vader. Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side had been carefully planned over years of manipulation, and before confronting Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, Anakin had already committed his first crime as a Sith. Palpatine ordered him to march on the Jedi Temple with the 501st Legion and eliminate everyone inside. When a youngling asked what they should do with so many attackers outside, Anakin ignited his lightsaber. The massacre that followed marked his complete transformation from Jedi Knight to Sith Enforcer. The confrontation on Mustafar sealed Anakin's fate. Obi-Wan gained the high ground on a black sandbank and warned his former Padawan not to attempt the jump. Anakin leaped anyway, using the same move Obi-Wan had used against Darth Maul decades earlier, and while Anakin was in mid-air, Obi-Wan's lightsaber severed his left arm and both legs in a single strike. The former Jedi collapsed onto the bank near the lava river, and as gravity pulled him toward the molten flow, his right thigh caught fire. The flames spread rapidly across his body, consuming his clothes and flesh, and within moments he was fully engulfed, his face scorched beyond recognition, his hair burned away completely. Obi-Wan stood over him, grief-stricken, and spoke his final words to the man who had been his brother. He reminded Anakin that he had been the chosen one, destined to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. Then he took Anakin's lightsaber and left, unable to bring himself to end his former apprentice's suffering. Palpatine arrived to find Anakin barely alive, his remaining hand clinging desperately to the soil as consciousness faded, and the Emperor ordered stormtroopers to bring a medical capsule right away. Anakin was transported to the Grand Republic Medical Facility on Coruscant, where surgical droids began the extensive reconstruction. They replaced his severed limbs with cybernetic prosthetics and encased his ruined body in black armor equipped with a life support system. The agonizing process, Anakin remained conscious throughout as the droids attached his new legs, then his armor, and finally the helmet that would conceal his disfigured face. When the helmet locked into place and the breathing apparatus activated, Darth Vader took his first mechanical breath. The table raised him to a standing position, and Palpatine asked if he could hear him. Vader's first words in the armor were an acknowledgement of his new master. Then he asked about Padme, desperately wanting to know if she was safe. Palpatine delivered the final psychological blow, telling Vader that it seemed in his anger he had killed her himself. Vader's response was immediate anguish, insisting that he could not have done it, that he had felt she was alive. However, Palpatine's words had shattered what remained of Anakin Skywalker's spirit. Vader used the Force to break free from his restraints and crushed the medical equipment throughout the facility, his scream of denial echoing through the facility. Palpatine smiled, knowing he had broken the man completely and secured absolute control over his new apprentice. The relationship between Darth Sidious and Darth Vader represented both the Rule of Two's ultimate perfection and its fatal corruption. For nearly 19 years, they maintained Bane's ancient tradition, one master embodying power, one apprentice craving it. Yet their dynamic broke the Rule of Two's core principle from the beginning. Traditional Sith apprentices spent years plotting to overthrow their masters, driven by ambition and hunger for power. But Vader served because he had nothing else left. The guilt of his crimes crushed him more effectively than any chains.
He had slaughtered younglings, choked Padme, and betrayed everything he once believed. The cybernetic suit kept him alive, but it also kept him dependent. Sidious designed it intentionally to cause constant low-level pain that Vader could channel into dark side power while creating permanent physical dependence. 5 years into their partnership, in 14 BBY, the mission to Ryloth revealed the toxic reality of their relationship. When traveling to the planet, the Emperor sensed Vader's thoughts turning towards violence and asked if his apprentice was pondering the nature of strength. Vader responded that he had been thinking of the lessons about the relationship of a Sith master to his apprentice. The Emperor referred to Vader as his friend, but he understood the purpose. His master used a term he might use with a peer to emphasize that master and apprentice were in fact not peers.
The Emperor pressed further, demanding his apprentice share his thoughts, and Vader dropped to one knee and bowed his head in submission, telling his master that he perceived strength all around him. Sidious was pleased with this answer. During their mission, rebels attacked their ship, and as the shuttle made an emergency landing on Ryloth's surface, memories flooded Vader's mind. He remembered floating in an escape pod over this same planet during the Clone Wars. The memory of Ahsoka Tano surfaced. He had called her Snips, and seeing Ryloth's surface brought more memories rushing back. Anakin, Mace Windu, Plo Koon, Mustafar, Obi-Wan. Then came the name he rarely allowed himself to think, Padme. The Sith Lord tried to burn away the memories with anger, but the remnants clung to his consciousness, and his rage slipped from his control, causing him to squeeze the control stick so hard it cracked. His breathing grew rapid and labored as the shuttle descended, and the landing was disastrous. 4 royal guards lay dead in the rear compartment, casualties of his distracted mind. Sidious's criticism came swiftly when they emerged from the crashed shuttle, saying that landing had been far beneath his apprentice's abilities. When pressed, Vader admitted the truth. He had been thinking about the past, his old life. The Emperor's response was direct. Dwelling on the past was a weakness. Then the Sith Master showed exactly what he meant. A wounded royal guard lay groaning on the ground, and Sidious ordered another guard to kill his injured comrade. The killing happened instantly without question, and the Emperor explained coldly that stupidity, like nostalgia, was weakness. He could not accept weakness in those close to him. Vader activated his lightsaber, and while it sizzled, his master stared without expression into his face. The moment hung between them with deadly tension, but instead of attacking, the armored warrior used the blade to cut through the bulkhead door. He understood the message perfectly. Later, the apprentice asked directly if his master was testing him, and Sidious's answer was chilling. They were always being tested. Tests made them stronger, and strength was power, and power was the point. They must pass all tests or die trying. Deep in Ryloth's forest, they faced swarms of deadly lilac creatures, and the 2 Sith fought together with perfect coordination. They moved back to back, protecting each other, with the armored warrior blasting lilacs apart with the Force, and the Emperor unleashing waves of energy that threw creatures against walls. Within moments, mountains of lilac corpses surrounded them. During the battle against the Lilac Queen, a dangerous thought crossed Vader's mind, his master dead, himself ruling the Empire. However, he crushed the thought instantly and leapt down to save Sidious. After the battle ended, the Emperor asked if his apprentice had considered letting him die, and Vader admitted he had, but clarified that only for a moment. Surprisingly, his master approved of his answer.
Sidious then explained his meaning. When the queen died, the creature struggled without her. With the head removed, the body perishes. Many things work that way, including relationships. Without the Emperor, Vader could not exist. The warning was clear. His apprentice depended entirely on him for survival. The mission's final test came during a meditation session. The Emperor asked what his apprentice had seen in his visions, and Vader described deaths and faces from his past, the events that led him to this moment. As Sidious listened, his anger started to grow, and he made a direct accusation, asking if Vader had been a traitor to the Jedi, to Padme, to Obi-Wan, to everyone he loved. At first, Vader hesitated, unsure on what answer his master wanted, but finally he answered yes, he had been a traitor to them all. Sidious continued pressing, asking if Vader thought betrayal began in the deed, and Vader responded that it began in the thoughts. The Emperor agreed, explaining that no one could truly know the thoughts of another, especially a traitor who guards them closely. For a moment, Vader wondered what it would be like to face his master in battle, to take his small, frail body and lift it from the ground. Sidious sensed the thought instantly and smiled darkly, telling his apprentice that he saw right through him. Vader defended himself with bold defiance, arguing that the Emperor was wrong to think he longed for the past. He didn't long for it at all, but instead thought of it and the man he once was with complete contempt. His memories fed his anger, and his anger fed his strength, making him a better servant. Then the armored Sith added something shocking, telling his master directly that his doubt was both unwarranted and insulting. Silence fell between them, and each Sith Lord stared across the flames at the other, both weighing their options. The tension stretched as violence hung in the air, and at the critical moment, Vader dropped to one knee before his master. Not both knees in total submission, but one knee in calculated respect. The Emperor considered this gesture before finally telling him to arise. However, the tests were not finished. As they traveled, a young Twi'lek girl named Dua emerged from the forest. The Emperor commanded her to come to him, using the Force to pull her forward. With startling speed, Sidious drew his saber and slashed at the girl. Vader moved even faster and blocked the blow, and the girl stood between their crossed blades, unaware of the danger. The Emperor's face twisted in anger as he gathered power, and without even looking, Vader used the Force to blast the Emperor's bodyguard into the trees. The two Sith stared at each other across their sizzling blades, and the Emperor asked if his apprentice was truly willing to fight him over this girl.
Vader quickly explained that the girl could be useful to them, since there must be a village nearby with a ship. After a long pause, the Emperor deactivated his blade and agreed she might be helpful. Later, Sidious explained the consequences of Vader's choice. By saving one life, his apprentice had doomed 37 others. The village that helped them would have to be eliminated as witnesses. The Emperor used Sith words to make his point. Kata meant death, Iluk meant fate. He told Vader directly that he had killed them all the moment he spared that girl. The village massacre became Vader's final test. After their mission succeeded and the rebels were defeated, the Emperor stated they could not allow so many witnesses to live, and he ordered his apprentice to eliminate the villagers who had helped them. Without hesitation, Vader ignited his lightsaber and walked toward the cave where the Twi'leks had fled. His mind drifted back to another day when he had walked into the Jedi temple filled with younglings. He had slaughtered them then, and he would slaughter the Twi'leks now to prove his loyalty.
His master's laughter followed him into the cave, lingering in his mind even louder than the screams of the Twi'leks as they died by his blade. When finished, he returned to his master's side, and the Emperor praised him, calling him an old friend, and suggested they move on to more important things. Vader realized later what the entire day had been. His master had given him a test. This explained why the Emperor had shown so little of his true power throughout their ordeal, perhaps wanting his apprentice to rely on himself to overcome the challenges, or perhaps wanting to appear weaker than he was, hoping to draw out any hidden plans of betrayal. The relationship after Ryloth was forever changed. Vader had shown mercy by saving Dua, revealing a weakness, and the Emperor had forced him to destroy that mercy by ordering the village massacre. Vader had admitted to thinking about killing his master, and the Emperor had acknowledged this was expected and even welcomed, as long as Vader didn't act on it yet. Both understood the game completely. The Emperor knew his apprentice thought about killing him, and Vader knew his master was constantly testing whether he would act on those thoughts. They were bound together in mutual need. The Emperor needed Vader's combat power, and Vader needed the Emperor's knowledge and authority. Neither could kill the other without losing something crucial. An apprentice was completely loyal until the moment he wasn't, and both master and apprentice knew this truth. They both knew betrayal would come eventually. The only question was when. For now, they would continue playing the game, testing, watching, waiting. Each survival proved their value to the other, and each test brought them closer to the moment when one would finally strike and only one would remain. By 4 ABI, nearly 2 decades after their partnership, nothing had changed. Not until Luke Skywalker appeared and everything Sidious had carefully built began to fall apart. When Luke surrendered himself on Endor, he insisted there was still good in his father, telling Vader that Anakin Skywalker was his true self and that he had only forgotten who he was. Vader rejected this completely, stating that that name no longer had any meaning to him. When Luke pressed further, saying the Emperor had not fully driven the good from him, Vader warned that his son did not understand the power of the dark side and must obey his master. Luke insisted he would not turn and that Vader would be forced to kill him, and Vader responded coldly that if such was his destiny, so be it. However, when Luke encouraged him to search his feelings, that he could sense the conflict within him, the Sith's certainty began to waver, though he admitted it was too late for him. Later in the throne room, Sidious revealed his true plan, explaining that he looked forward to completing Luke's training, and that in time, the young Jedi would call him Master. The trap had been set perfectly. Luke's friends on the Sanctuary Moon were walking into an ambush, and the rebel fleet approaching the Death Star would find the deflector shield fully operational. Everything had happened according to his design. As Sidious described how Luke's friends would die, he encouraged the young Jedi to give in to his anger, pointing to Luke's lightsaber and inviting him to strike down an unarmed opponent. With each passing moment, the Emperor explained, Luke made himself his servant. When the Death Star fired on a rebel ship and killed hundreds, Luke's rage finally broke through his restraint. He summoned his weapon and struck at the Emperor, and Vader's lightsaber blocked the blow instantly. Father and son dueled while the Emperor watched with satisfaction. Luke fought aggressively at first, even kicking Vader down the stairs to subdue him. But amidst the duel, the Jedi stopped, recognizing he was being manipulated into darkness. Therefore, he deactivated his lightsaber and refused to continue. His father warned he was unwise to lower his defenses and proceeded to attack him,
and for this reason, Luke was forced to defend himself, but tried reasoning with his father, insisting he could sense the good in him and the conflict he felt.
Vader denied any conflict existed and responded that Luke underestimated the dark side's power. If his son would not fight, he would meet his destiny. Then Vader made his fatal mistake. He mentioned that if Luke would not turn to the dark side, perhaps his twin sister would. The words triggered something primal in Luke. He screamed and emerged from hiding with pure fury, attacking his father with overwhelming force. He struck repeatedly without control until he severed Vader's right mechanical hand and his father collapsed, defeated and helpless. The Emperor urged Luke to fulfill his destiny and take his father's place at his side. However, Luke looked at his father's severed hand, then at his own prosthetic hand, and realized the path he was walking. He deactivated his lightsaber and threw it away, declaring he would never turn to the dark side. He was a Jedi like his father before him. Sidious's response was immediate rage. He attacked Luke with Force lightning, the crackling energy causing terrible pain. Luke fell to the ground, writhing as the torture continued. He called out desperately for help, begging his father to save him. Vader stood watching his son suffer, looking back and forth between the Emperor unleashing lightning and Luke crying out in agony. The moment stretched as decades of buried humanity fought against years of dark side control, and Luke's cries grew stronger and more desperate. Finally, something broke inside Vader that all the Emperor's tests and manipulation had not destroyed. He moved behind Sidious and lifted his master into the air, and the Emperor's lightning struck Vader as he carried him, the electrical energy running through his armor and destroying his life support systems. Vader did not stop. He threw the Emperor down the Death Star's reactor shaft, killing the man who had controlled him for years. The lightning had fatally wounded Vader, and as Luke carried his father's broken body toward an Imperial shuttle during the evacuation, Anakin asked his son to remove his mask. Luke hesitated, knowing it would kill him, but Anakin insisted, wanting to look upon his son with his own eyes just once. When the helmet came off, Anakin smiled at seeing Luke's face, and he told his son to leave him, but Luke refused, insisting he would save him. Anakin's response was gentle but final. Luke had already saved him. He had been right about there still being good in Anakin Skywalker. His last words were a request to tell his sister that Luke had been right about everything. Anakin Skywalker died redeemed, tears running down Luke's face as his father passed away in his arms. The man who had been Darth Vader, enforcer of the Empire and apprentice to the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years, died not as a Sith, but as a Jedi. He had destroyed his master not to claim power for himself, but to save his son. Love had proven stronger than the dark side's corruption. From the Rule of Two's perspective, Vader had served as Sidious's apprentice for approximately 23 years. Their relationship broken the system's basic purpose from the beginning because Vader was mentally broken rather than planning to overthrow his master. Sidious kept him dependent rather than training a true successor, and the constant testing and threats created hate instead of loyalty. Neither wanted the traditional path of eventual betrayal, but both knew it would come. When Vader finally killed his master, he did so for love of his son rather than hunger for power. He died moments later, ensuring no one would claim the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. Luke refused to take his father's place, throwing away his lightsaber rather than accepting the Emperor's offer.
The rule of two ended on the second Death Star in 4 ABY, not through the apprentice surpassing and replacing the master, as Bane intended, but through the apprentice choosing sacrifice over power. A system built entirely on betrayal, driven by selfish ambition, was destroyed by loyalty, driven by selfless love. Bane designed the rule of two to channel the dark side's basic nature of taking, consuming, and dominating, creating a system that forced each generation to embrace these ideas more completely than the last. Bane never expected someone within the system to choose differently. He never imagined an apprentice powerful enough to kill their master, but refusing to claim the reward. The rule of two's basic belief was that all Force users valued power above everything else, and Vader proved this belief wrong in his final act. After 1,000 years of masters falling to ambitious apprentices, and apprentices becoming masters through brutal betrayal, the cycle ended because Vader chose his son over unlimited power. For over 1,000 years, only 2 Sith existed at any given time, one master to hold power, one apprentice to want it. Each generation stronger than the last, each betrayal sharpening the blade that eventually destroyed the Republic. The Sith survived for a millennium through patience, planning, and the rule of two. The same system that made them strong also held the seeds of their destruction. Darth Bane created a philosophy that demanded complete selfishness, and in the end, that philosophy was defeated not by the Jedi, but by a father's love for his son. None of these events would have been possible without the choices of one man, a minor who became the architect of the Sith secret empire. And to understand how his vision began the rule of two and changed the galaxy forever, one must look back to the beginning of this long and tragic tale.